All right, so now, if we're moving along, like, tell us if you like swapped guilds at this phase.
Okay.
So we're in phase 2 now, and you're still the mage, or you're kind of like
still in the mage to start. Yeah, that's funny. I guess I'm gonna ultimately end up swapping guilds each phase. So, onto the new phase, onto the new guild, I guess.
There you go.
Phase 2. Let's see. So we started off phase 2. The goal of Insidious was largely to do what we had done in Onslaught, which was to try to go for world first clears of each raid, and then after that, like, speed run the raid. So we had been prepping before phase 2 had come out with doing a bunch of PTRing to just basically practice to try to get the world first clear. And the PTR sessions were rough, to say the least. They didn't go all that well overall. And by the time tier 5 actually came out, we did okay. We cleared everything the first night, but I don't think we were anywhere in the conversation of
you didn't do
world first really at any point.
Rocket boots, parachute cloaks to the pipe.
Well, we were trying to do cool stuff. I mean, we did do some nifty invis skips, and we did some I don't know, had some, I guess, at least for what were at the time, fancy strats, but I think it was clear at that point that the guild was, I don't know, it's hard. Some weird thing about guilds is, like, they can be great on paper, but sometimes, like, the roster just jives, and sometimes it doesn't. Like,
yeah,
you can have a bunch of people
have a lot of pumpers, but
yeah, they can all be great players, but if you don't get along, or if you just don't synergize all that well, like, it can still be a disaster, even if everyone's good at the game.
It kind of reminds me of like a sports team, and bringing a bunch of stars into one sports team. All of a sudden, there's a lot of
you don't have the right
back
coach.
And forth. Yeah,
you can get a lot of
I don't know if you guys follow baseball at all, but yeah, the Angels have 2 of the best baseball players in the world, and they just finished losing 14 straight games. So. Yeah. Yep. Basically what happened with the guild was, about a week after the underwhelming results when tier 5 came out, the GM called it quits. And so that, I assumed at that point that was the end of the guild. Like, it ended up actually continuing past that point. Like, one of the officers of the guild actually kept it going. So I stayed in with Insidious for the next, I think, couple of months or so. I stayed in through the rest of the phase. So I kept doing raids with them, but at that point I kind of realized it wasn't quite what I was looking for in TBC, because I was trying to go for something maybe a little bit loftier goal-wise. And so I ended up actually making the decision to completely re-roll and start on European servers, which is not something I'd ever done before. And I joined Salad Bakers, which were one of the more well-known guilds back from Vanilla. And I already knew the GM Laddie from through his stream. Like, I knew him through him streaming and I streaming. And I played with him a little bit in Vanilla. So it was actually at that point you were asking about if I stuck to Major Warrior main. I'd also been playing Enhanced Shaman for more experimentally, I guess, in phase 1, but I actually swapped to playing Enhanced Shaman as my full-time main with Salad Bakers. I think it was, I guess, a month into phase 2 is when that happened or so.
Nice.
So that
how does the Enhanced Shaman stack up to the Warrior?
Enhanced Shaman's interesting because it's not really a pure DPS class. It's more of it's a hybrid, right? In the most traditional sense of the word. And I think
like
a lot of people
utility vehicle, like high end, but not your Ferrari, right?
I'm not sure that analogy works. I think it's more like it's kind of like it's just like a Swiss Army knife. It's got like all the different tools built into one, and it's not necessarily the best to use for any one particular job that you need it for, but it does so many things so well that, like, you always want to have one.
Is Enhanced the melee or the caster?
The melee one.
I never remember.
Yeah, it's the one that's totem twisting. So Enhance is interesting because it's not a class that can never top the meters or anything, but it's a class that has a huge impact on the overall raid damage, because it brings like a ton of totems and obviously bloodlust and ability to use drums, assuming you're a leather worker. So it wasn't a class I was sure I was going to like, just because I've only ever really played more just pure DPS classes. But the combination of support plus DPS that you're trying to do at the same time and trying to optimize it by totem twisting correctly is really interesting. So it was a class I was actually really surprised to like as much as I do. I'm not sure I'd ever want to play it as my only class, because it is also fun to play the classes that can top the meters. But as one of my
You just
classes.
you have to scroll down and start your meter at like 7, and then you'll feel like you're closer.
No. All you have to do is you look at the warriors in your group and see if they top their like, I did that. That was because of me.
Right.
Vicariously through them. Yeah.
There you go.
Yep. All right, but so phase 2, like I assume, like pretty much you didn't really have any like basically you were after day 1 you had it on farm, because that was one of the hardest, like the pre-nerf SSC TK was one of the things that actually like pointed out, oh shit, well now we've actually gotten to raids where people aren't completing them, because I mean still before nerf happened, over half of the guilds still had not killed all of the bosses, which was kind of crazy at this point for what we'd seen in Classic throughout. I mean, there was quite a lot less people doing Nax at the end, true, but
well, especially going from Kara, Mag, and Gruul to SSC and TK, I think was just a shock to a lot of people too. And I think you ended up losing some people in Kara, Gruul, and Mag because of how long it went. We didn't lose anybody in our guild, but I know people were taking a little bit of a break.
A lot of people did, yeah.
But like you guys had pretty much didn't have a problem, right? Or did you have like wipes and stuff like that? I'm just curious from the top end guilds.
Do you ever wipe?
I mean, we cleared week 1, and so like every week we would still clear. So I mean, I guess on that front you could say that it was never a problem. It was never a question of where we're going to kill the boss that week. But I mean, even for top guilds, it wasn't a joke. I mean, you could still very easily, if people came unfocused and if people came maybe with not a little distracted or they were tired or something, like I still had plenty of nights where I'd wiped on Bosch for 2 hours, just even if we'd killed it before, just because because of the mechanics they weren't easy, right? It was the first raid content where you couldn't just walk in and kind of half pay attention and expect to kill the bosses. And so, I mean, all the people that have been asking for hard classic content up to that point, well, I mean,
here you
got it. And it was interesting to see how many people who had been asking, like, I want hard, challenging raid content, all of a sudden they did the 180 and like, well, I mean, maybe not this hard. Like, I would like to get my loot at some point too.
Right. We're like, I mean, I still want to kill it. I don't know.
I don't mind wiping for one night, but after that, like, I do want my loot.
Well, like, and we've talked about it. There's so many weird things with phase 2. Like, for instance, like the tier was garbage for most warlocks, and you're stacking quite a bit of warlocks. Like, there just wasn't a ton of gear everybody wanted, except for Vash and KT. So you're sitting there clearing it every week, and then have to do the crazy long Vash run back for each attempt that you get on it, and like really you're like disenchanting all the gear prior through the instance, for the most part. So the gearing was a little weird, we thought, but I don't know if you had any thoughts. I guess it's kind of hard with you killing the first night, like you got gear the first night, so kind of hard for you.
Yeah, sure, but I think the more applicable experience I had, like with what you're talking about, is it was the first raid tier that you couldn't just easily pug, right? You couldn't just join some random pug out of World Chat and expect to kill everything. Like all of a sudden, there were GDKPs out there that could kill Vosh and KT, but you kind of had to know someone, right? You kind of had to know like the good ones. So if you're a guild character, you could gear them up.
Gold.
Yeah, or have a ton of gold. Yeah. So if you're good, your guild characters, like I was okay, but for my alts, it was rough because you couldn't just go in and expect to say, like, it wasn't a question of like, ooh, well, if the loot drops, am I going to buy it? It was a question of like, where we're going to kill the boss, so that way the loot. So.
Right.
Yeah, so that was definitely a rough part about trying to gear the characters that weren't in guilds at the time for me, and I'm assuming probably a lot of people, just because Vosh and KT especially were just fights that if you hadn't practiced the same fight with the same people over and over again, it was a lot there's just like little things about those fights that people would mess up if they did it differently depending on which guild you were in.
And it was very punishing, right? Like it was the first raid that I think really opened our eyes to figuring out who the weak links were, right? Because before they could kind of skate under the radar and it wasn't as big of a deal, at least in a, semi-casual guild. And I think this was like, oh, okay, if you mess up, you kill everybody. So now we need to figure you out because that's not going to work, right?
Yeah, the one guy that's standing too close to Capernian, all of a sudden he kills everybody because he got hit by the con flag, and then he does it 3 more attempts, and you're wondering why.
Yeah, then he goes run through the raid and stuff.
Yeah,
it's fine.
Yeah, I don't know. I thought it was interesting that it was the first hard content of that up to that point, but I do wonder if it was actually. I mean, it's what a lot of people have been asking for a while, but I do wonder, like, in hindsight, was it actually good for the game that it was that hard for that long? I don't know. It's hard to say.
I feel like for us, we're not super hardcore, but we're not super casual either. We're like kind of in the middle there. We've got some pumper hardcore people, and then we've got some less hardcore people.
I'm trying
but for us, I feel like it was perfect, right? Because we were able to progress. We all enjoyed kind of not killing everything day one, and not having to, because really our guild, when we start things on farm, just kind of trickles off on their attention spans.
Yeah.
And so I think that we were able to get KT and Vash down pre-nerf, but not like way pre-nerf, right? Like we would have been really mad if they would have nerfed it before we got it down.
Okay, so there was the half week, but I think we got it down. I can't remember exactly, but I think it was the third full week. And then KT was the next week. But like the problem
we did Bash first, and then we went to KT, and we were like, oh.
We kind of found out.
I was gonna say normally it was the opposite.
Yeah, we did it wrong, but it was crazy because I feel like we were forged, we were galvanized by the progress on Lady Vash. I think we dropped her on the 24th attempt. I think we had 23 wipes on Vash, and then it only took like 8 wipes on KT to drop KT. But the problem is we had to prioritize those things because of so many bosses. So like after we dropped Vash, we just went straight to KT the next week and just tried to drop it rather than even thinking about going to SSC, right? So like, but like, what's funny is like, if we would have just done KT first, we might have done a better job and been faster. I don't know. But like, basically just doing all those attempts really did. I think
it was the coordination on Bash that held us back, right? Like, I think it was just getting everybody on the same page, getting everybody to do what they needed to do. And there was just a lot of moving parts on Bash, and getting our guild to become coordinated enough to do that, I think made KT a lot easier, right? Because
once you have that coordination already, I mean, because Vosh, I mean, most people would have agreed that like it was the harder boss. So like if you can get that down at that point, you were already kind of set for KT for sure.
Yep. Oh, okay. So all right. So you stayed with Insidious all through phase 2.
No, Salad Bakers.
Bakers.
I was in both. Yeah, for phase 2. Yeah.
Oh, you were both. Okay, I missed that part.
I had stayed on the mage in phase 2, and then you
did the shaman on
I was in the
Salad
shaman.
Bakers. Gotcha.
And this entire time in the background too, I was actually playing a warrior as well. But at least for this entire time, it was still just like, oh, what's this? It's the for fun alt,
right?
At the time,
maybe
maybe someday. You never know, right?
All right, so then it gets nerfed. It becomes just absurdly easy. I mean, it was a joke at that point. I think KT actually was harder than Vash at that point.
Based on my pug experience, there's pugs to this day that will still wipe on KT hilariously.
Thank you very much for checking out Warcraft Reloaded podcast. Make sure to like and subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss any future content.